This happened a couple of years ago. At the time, I was living with my parents in a sprawling, old 3-bedroom apartment in a historic building. I always loved animals, but for some reason, they never lasted long in our house. They either died or ran away for unexplained reasons. There were many times when a pet would get severely sick, and in a miserable state, we would give it away to a different home. And literally, a week later, in a new house, animal would miraculously revive, become completely healthy, and live for many years. At first, I blamed it all on my own irresponsibility and inability to care for them. But one day, when I got a dog, I looked at it from a completely different perspective. My dog was constantly staring at something. It would sit in the middle of the room and stare into empty corners as if it saw something we didn't see. Sometimes it would bark aggressively at empty doorways and growl, baring its teeth. I tried to logically explain it to myself by thinking that it probably just heard the noise of the neighbors behind the old walls. But one night, I was lying in my bed. The apartment was submerged in silence. Suddenly, I heard the thick power cables from my laptop scattered across the floor start moving loudly. It sounded exactly like someone heavy had caught their feet in them and was dragging them across the hardwood floor. I thought it was my dad getting up for water. I called out to him into the dark, but nobody answered me. Then I called for my mom. Nothing. My only answer was the sound of someone's breathing coming from right out in the hallway. Deep, raspy breathing that did not sound human whatsoever. Shivers ran down my spine. I yelled, "Hey, stop messing around," hoping it was just a prank. No answer followed. I forced myself to get up and walked out into the dark hallway to see who was there. There was no one. I carefully peeked into my parents' room. They were fast asleep. At that exact moment, my dog started owling in the living room. It was a long, pitiful owl full of pure fear. And that is when I started to feel truly terrified. A couple of weeks later, the situation escalated. My parents went away for the weekend, and I was left to sleep at home absolutely alone. I watched a movie, turned off the lights everywhere, and went to bed. Barely had I settled under the blanket when a sound echoed. Someone knocked clearly 3 times on the wooden door of the bathroom. Probably any person knows exactly how a knock sounds on every specific door in their own house. I froze. I stopped breathing. A dead, oppressive silence fell over the apartment. I started calming myself down, thinking I just imagined it. But then came 3 more loud, slow knocks. This time on the front door. I jumped out of bed. I was shaking. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my older brother, Mark, who lived just a 10-minute walk away from me. I started hysterically explaining to him that someone was inside the apartment. He told me not to panic and to calm down. He advised me to walk up to the door and look through the peephole. I did exactly that. I walked down the long hallway toward the front door, turning off the lights in every single room along the way to feel safe. But the second I reached the front door, the lights in the entire apartment violently shut off. The power was cut. I was completely paralyzed by shock in the darkness. I pressed my face against the door and looked through the peephole. I could clearly see that the lights in the hallway outside were still on. The problem was only inside my apartment. I started crying into the phone from fear and begged Mark to come to me. He said, "I'm leaving right now. Lock yourself in the..." But he couldn't even finish his last sentence before my phone simply shut off. The screen went black. The battery couldn't possibly be dead because it had been on the charger all day. I was left in suffocating darkness. I gathered my courage and with a determined but trembling step walked to the pantry for candles. I lit a candle, took it in my hand, and walked back to my room, whispering prayers for all of this to stop. And then I heard footsteps inside the apartment, right in the hallway. At first, they were slow, heavy steps, and then someone bolted and literally ran into my room. The sound of the footsteps stopped right in front of me in the gloom. From that visceral fear, I started having severe gag reflexes. I rushed into the bathroom and I literally threw up from the sheer stress. And then I heard a sharp ring from the intercom. I was incredibly surprised because I knew that if there was no power in the apartment, the intercom shouldn't be working either. I ran out into the hallway. Barely had I reached the door when suddenly a loud knock echoed again. I froze, expecting the worst, but then I instantly heard Mark's voice behind the door. Sighing with massive relief, I clicked the lock and threw the door open. At that exact moment, like a snap of the finger, the lights turned back on the entire apartment. And immediately, I heard the chime of my phone turning itself back on in my bedroom. Mark stood on the threshold. He had also seen the lights suddenly turn on by themselves, and now he was looking at my face, which was as pale as a chalk. We sat in the kitchen that entire night without closing our eyes. After that incident, the entity stopped hiding. Everyone in the household began to constantly hear someone heavy walking around the apartment. Dishes would shatter on their own, wires would fly through the air. Relationships in the family became incredibly tense. We were always fighting because of that oppressive feeling. Soon, we made the decision to move out immediately. We sold the apartment, new tenants moved in. Literally a month later, these new tenants called up early in the morning. They tearfully asked if we had ever noticed anything unusual in that apartment. We shuddered and answered negatively, hiding the truth. Then, with a trembling voice, they told us what happened. During the night, they heard the horrific scream and crying of their infant daughter. They ran into the nursery in the panic, and what they saw made them freeze in absolute horror. Their baby wasn't lying in the crib. The baby was suspended in the air 3 feet off the floor. The little girl was choking as if someone large and invisible was tightly holding her by the throat. As soon as the adults entered the room and screamed, the invisible hand sharply released its grip. The infant fell to the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The little girl suffered a concussion that night. What that creature was and how those people are living now, I don't know. I hung up the phone and never contacted them again. But every single day, I thank God that we moved out of that cursed apartment in time. They say my home is my castle, but the thicker the walls, the more terrifying it is when the enemy turns out to be inside. Veronica was a normal woman, the life of the party. She lived in an old apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. But one day, 5 years ago, she vanished. She just packed her bags and left without saying goodbye. The neighbors gossiped for a bit, then forgot her. I bumped into her by accident 6 months ago. I was hiking deep in the woods and stumbled upon a small off-grid cabin. Veronica was living there like a hermit. She looked older, but she was happy to see the familiar face. We were drinking tea on a porch. Her cabin was cozy, but I noticed one odd detail. She had no indoor plumbing, no pipes anywhere. Water came from a well in baskets, and the restroom was the outhouse. Must be tough without amenities, I asked. Your old apartment had central heating, A sewer system. Veronica's face changed. Her smile vanished. She put her mug down and her hands started to tremble. Huh, amenities, she whispered. No, never again. You have no idea what can live inside those pipes. And then she told me why she ran away. I loved that apartment. Fourth floor, bright kitchen, quiet neighbors. I lived there for 4 years in perfect peace. But in the 5th year, it started. I'm not a quiet person. I walk heavily, I watch TV loud, so I didn't notice it right away. It began while I was washing dishes. I turned off the tap to scrub the plate, and I heard it. A whisper. It wasn't coming from the hallway or the neighbors. It was coming from below, straight out of the kitchen sink drain. At first, it was just a gurgle, but then the sounds got sharper. It sounded like a child who had lost their voice. A wet, raspy whisper, amplified by the echo of a metal pipe. I leaned closer to the black hole of the drain. It smelled of dampness and rot, and the voice said, "It's so tight here. It's so dark. I can't get through." My heart dropped to my stomach. I thought maybe a child got stuck in the ventilation shaft, but the voice was too close, right under the metal grate. I called the plumber the next day. A big guy came over, shined a flashlight down there, ran a long metal snake into the pipe. "Got a clock, lady?" he asked. "There is someone in there," I said. He looked at me like I was crazy, but when he started pulling the snake back up, he frowned. The cable was covered in thick black slime that smelled like old blood, and the tip of the snake had scratches on it, deep gouges in the metal. "You got rats, probably. Mutants or something," he joked nervously, took a cash, and left very quickly. He clearly didn't want to stay there. After the plumber left, I decided to handle it myself. I bought the strongest drain cleaner I could find, industrial strength acid that dissolves hair and grease. I put on gloves and poured the entire bottle down the black throat of the sink. I expected fizzing or a sound of a clog breaking up. Instead, I heard coughing, a dry, hacking cough coming from the deep, and then thick yellow smoke billowed out of the drain. It didn't smell like chemicals, it smelled like burning skin. The sink started to vibrate, and that same voice, now filled with pain, hissed, "It burns. Why are you hurting me?" Terrified, I slammed a dinner plate over the drain and ran out of the kitchen. I could swear I heard someone weeping inside the pipes. It was quiet for a week. I almost calmed down, but then that night happened. There was a heat wave, and I left the bedroom door open for a draft. I woke up at 3 a.m. to a sound. It was coming from the kitchen, the sound of a fingernail tapping against the metal sink from the inside. I lay in the bed, paralyzed with terror, and then that voice again, louder, angrier. "Move over. I need room. Get this out of the way." The sound got louder, as if something massive was trying to squeeze through the narrow band of the pipe. The metal creaked. I didn't go to check. I tiptoed to the bedroom door and slammed it shut. I pushed my dresser against the door. I spent the rest of the night on the balcony, clutching a knife and staring at the door handle, praying it wouldn't turn. I thought I was going crazy. In the morning, I went to the neighbors. I asked about cults, about basement. They told me the basement was dry, just some rats occasionally. No one believed me. A month passed. Humans get used to anything. I decided it was the plumbing, water pressure, my nerves, That Sunday, I decided to cook steaks. I took a large piece of frozen meat and put it in the sink to defrost. I went to the living room to watch a show. An hour later, I came back to the kitchen. The meat was gone. Well, not gone, but it was smaller. The piece was halfway pulled into the drain hole, as if someone from below had grabbed it and was pulling it down. I got angry. I thought the water suction caused it. I grabbed the piece of meat and pulled. It didn't budge. It was stuck tight. I braced my foot against the cabinet and yanked with all my strength. There was a wet, squelching sound. The meat flew out of the pipe. I looked at it and screamed. The bottom part wasn't torn. It was not. There were clear marks of human teeth on it. And then, from the pipe came a deafening, furious shriek. "Give it back, it's mine!" The walls shook. I heard the pipes inside the walls start to hum and buckle. Plaster rained down. Something huge, incredibly strong, was tearing its way up, breaking plastic and metal to get to me. It smelled fresh food. I dropped everything. I ran out of the apartment in just my clothes, clutching only my keys and passport. I heard a pipe burst with a crash in the kitchen, and something heavy slapped on the floor. I sold the apartment through the realtor without stepping foot inside again. I let it go dirt cheap. The realtor said there was a sewer burst and the kitchen was wrecked, but the new tenants were happy with a low price. It was a young couple with a baby. Sometimes I think about them. I feel guilty, but I couldn't stay. Now I live here. No pipes, no drains, no darkness hiding under the sink. 5 years have passed, and I still wonder, what was it? And how hungry it is right now. It was a cold winter evening. Sarah, a 16-year-old girl, was home alone. Her parents had gone to a friend's holiday party. Heavy snow had been falling all day, covering the world in a white blanket, but inside it was warm. Sarah sat on the living room couch, wrapped in a wool blanket, watching a movie. By midnight, her parents still hadn't returned, and the silence in the big house began to weigh on her. The TV stood in the corner next to a large panoramic window. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. In the darkness, amidst the falling snow, she made out the figure of a man. He was walking toward the house. As he approached the glass, the light from the screen hit his face. It was covered in scars, and his lips were stretched into a sinister, unnaturally white grin. Sarah froze, afraid to move. The man just stood there, staring silently at her through the glass. His eyes didn't blink. Then, he slowly reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something shiny. It was a long knife. Unable to take it anymore, Sarah grabbed her phone from the table and dialed 911, never taking her eyes off the creepy visitor. "There is a man outside the window," she whispered. "He has a knife, please, come quickly," she said, motionless, minutes dragging like hours. The man outside the window kept standing there, smiling at her. Finally, sirens were heard in the distance. Police started banging on the door. Sarah rushed to open it. The officers searched the perimeter, but came back with nothing. "Ma'am, we didn't find anyone," the officer said. "That's impossible," Sarah screamed, pointing at the window. "He was just standing right there. You couldn't have missed him." "It is what it is," the officer shook his head. "There is a fresh snow outside. It is completely undisturbed." If someone had been standing there, there would be footprints. But I saw him with my own eyes, she insisted. The officers were about to leave when one of them suddenly frowned. He slowly walked behind the couch where Sarah had been sitting. "Oh my God," he whispered. On the carpet right behind the couch were wet boot prints and a discarded knife. "You didn't see the man outside the window," the officer said, turning pale. "You were looking at his reflection in the glass. The whole time, he was standing right
behind you."
It was a Friday evening. I was working late in an empty office on the 14th floor. The building was absolutely dead, with only the low hum of the ventilation system breaking the silence. Outside, a massive rainstorm was raging. I was exhausted. I saved the last of my documents, turned off the monitor, and had just put on my jacket. At that exact moment, the silence was shattered by my cell phone ringing. There was no name on the screen, not even a string of digits, just the words "unknown caller." I let out a heavy sigh and accepted the call. "Hello?" I asked in a tired voice. "Hello, I need help, please. I'm begging you, help me." A man's voice blurted out. It was raged, broken, and full of tears. I rolled my eyes. Another prank call. "Look, if you have an actual emergency, call 911 or an ambulance. I can't help you," I said drearily and hung up the phone. I shoved the phone into my pocket and walked toward the elevators. But less than 5 minutes later, the same unknown number rang again. "Now you're really gonna get it," I thought angrily and answered the call. "Hello?" I practically shouted. Surprisingly, there was silence on the other end. But then, in the background, I heard voices and muffled screams. My anger vanished instantly. My stomach dropped. Maybe I was wrong to yell at him. Clearly, he really was in some kind of trouble. "Hello?" I asked, softer this time. "Please." The guy's breathless voice came back. "All right," I said, leaning against the wall. "You have 5 minutes." "It all started 3 days ago," he began speaking rapidly. "I was asleep in my apartment. At exactly midnight, I was woken up by a call. Blocked number. At first, there was just white static, and then a hoarse, grating man's voice whispered, 'Your deepest wish for a precious price. What do you want?' I thought it was someone's sick joke. I looked at the screen. The call timer showed we had been talking for over 5 minutes, even though only 10 seconds had passed. I got annoyed. My computer had just died, and I decided to play along with this prankster. 'All right,' I said into the receiver. 'I want the most powerful laptop in the world. How are we paying for it? Cash, or should I transfer some crypto?' The voice replied instantly, 'A deepest wish for a precious price. A laptop for your soul. You have exactly 3 days.' The call abruptly disconnected. I just scoffed in the dark. Yeah, whatever you say," I muttered, threw the phone on the nightstand, and went back to sleep. The guy on the line let out a heavy exhale. But in the morning, my doorbell rang. There was a black box sitting on my porch. Inside was a laptop. But how is that even possible? I never gave that voice my address. From that day forward, my life turned into a living hell. Things in my apartment started moving completely on their own. Constant rings at my doorbell. But when I looked through the peephole, no one was there. At night, dishes would shatter in the kitchen, and every single day, my phone would ring. Blocked number. I wouldn't pick it up, but that hoarse voice would whisper from the speaker, "Soon, very soon." And today, the third day arrived. The guy's voice broke into a quiet whimper. I woke up about 2 hours ago, completely tied to my bed. My ropes were biting into my wrists, but I wasn't alone. Sitting at the foot of my bed in the pitch darkness was something. It was completely black like a shadow, and it crawled up toward me. I could really feel the ice-cold edge of something sharp pressing slowly against my throat. A thin, freezing line of sting that made me realize one wrong breath and it would all be over. It leaned right into my ear and whispered, "Time is up. You will live till midnight. Call someone. Tell them everything. Pass the burden. Otherwise, your loved ones will die and you will die very slowly and painfully." Right now, I am lying in my bed. I am still tied up. This creature, the guys whispered, it's holding the phone to my ear right now. It forced me to dial a completely random string of numbers, and I got through to you. I fulfilled the condition. I told you this story. I passed the curse, and tonight at midnight, it will call you. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. The line went dead. He hung up. I stared blankly at my phone screen. Sick bastard. Played it perfectly. I was shaking a little bit, but I forced myself to laugh it off. I went down to the parking garage and got into my car. The entire drive home, I tried to push this nonsense out of my head. When I finally got to my apartment, I double-checked all the deadbolts. I took a shower, turned on every single light, and sat down in front of the TV. I kept convincing myself it was just an elaborate prank. Soon, pure exhaustion took over, and I passed out right on the couch to the mumbling of the news. I was violently jolted awake by a sharp vibration. My phone was buzzing aggressively on the glass coffee table. I snapped my eyes open. The TV was turned off. For some reason, all the lights in my apartment had gone out. The room was submerged in absolute darkness. Flashing on the display were the words, "Unknown caller." I threw a quick glance at the clock on the microwave. It read exactly 12 a.m. Midnight. My heart plummeted. With sweaty palms, I reached for the phone and pressed answer. White static word from the speaker, and then a hoarse, grating voice. "Your deepest wish for a precious prize. What do you want?" I jumped off the couch. I was shaking with animalistic terror. I remembered the guy from the office. "No," I screamed into the receiver. "No, I don't want anything from you. Go to hell!" A long pause hung on the line, just the static hissing. And then the voice let out a low chuckle. "A deepest wish for a price. You need nothing as you wish. Nothing for your soul. 3 days." The call disconnected. 2 days have passed since that moment. My apartment has turned into a nightmare. I hear footsteps at night. I see shadows. Yesterday, the massive bathroom mirror shattered into a million pieces. Today is the 3rd day. In just a few hours, midnight will strike. I'm sitting in the corner of my room, gripping a baseball bat. My hands are shaking. I'm losing my mind with fear. I want to leave. I really, truly want to leave. And now I know there is only one possible way to save myself. I'm sorry, but I just needed to share this story with someone. I'm taking out my cell phone right now. I'm dialing a random number. Who knows, maybe tonight my call will come through to you. 12 years old Emily lived with her father in the small suburban house. Since her mother died, her father had become everything to her. One morning, her father said he was leaving on the business trip and would be back late at night. "Don't open the door for anyone," he said, strictly kissing her forehead. "Even if you think it's me, check first." Emily nodded. After coming home from school, she did her homework and went to bed. She had a dream. She stood on the edge of a busy highway. On the other side stood her father. He was cupping his hands to his mouth and screaming desperately, but the sounds of cars drowned out his voice. She strained her ears and could barely make out the words.
Don't open the door.
And then Emily woke up. A loud doorbell was echoing through the house. She jumped up, put on her slippers, and ran to the door. Looking through the peephole, she saw her father's face. "Hold on, Dad, opening up," she yelled and grabbed the deadbolt. But something stopped her. She looked through the peephole again. Her father's eyes were wide open and unblinking. His face was pale, frozen in gray mass of fear. The bell rang again. "Dad?" she called out. Silence. Just a bell, again and again. "Dad, why aren't you answering?" She started to cry. "Is someone there with you? I won't open it until you answer." The doorbell rang for another hour, but her father stayed silent. The girl sat huddled in the corner of the hallway until she fell asleep from fear. She woke up. The ringing had stopped. She looked through the peephole. Her father was still there. With trembling hands, she unlocked the deadbolt and threw the door open. Her scream woke up all the neighbors. Her father was dead. His body was sitting on the porch, propped against the door like a broken doll. The whole time, someone was holding his corpse, pressing his face against the peephole and pushing the doorbell with their free hand. Attached to her father's chest was a note. "Smart girl." There was a time about 5 years ago when Mom started complaining about the doorbell ringing. It happened at night, between 2 and 3 a.m. Persistent, demanding. Mom said she was always surprised that no one else in the house heard it but her. She would go downstairs, walk to the hallway, and ask, "Who is it?" And every single time, the answer was dead silence. We didn't have the peephole back then. We only installed it during the renovation 2 years ago. So she would just stand there, listening intently, hoping to hear footsteps or rustling. But nothing. They rang, and they stayed silent. Mom never dared to open the door and just went back to bed. In the morning, she'd complain to me and Dad. My father, being a skeptic and a joker, said it was Mom's conscience visiting her from the void, or maybe the ghost of a pay raise. Mom didn't find it funny. Just like Dad, I never heard those strange rings and thought Mom was just imagining things in her sleep. But it repeated every week with frightening regularity. Eventually, Mom simply stopped going to the door and the nightly ringing stopped. As it turned out, only for a while. Since last year, I've started suffering from insomnia. I could lie in the dark for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock ticking right next to my ear. On nights like this, time drags slowly, like thick molasses. Only when the windows start to turn gray does sleep arrive, usually hollow and colorless. I didn't take sleeping pills. I just drank herbal tea with mint, but it didn't help much. The night turned into torture. It happened on one of those sleepless nights. Early February, a deep, moonless night. Outside, snow was falling heavily. I was alone in the house. My parents had gone to visit my grandmother, but couldn't make it back. Buses and roads were cancelled due to the blizzard. I went to bed late, around 1 a.m. Usually, I turn it earlier for classes, but as soon as my head hit the pillow, I knew sleep wasn't coming. I tossed and turned, wrapped myself into blankets, buried my head under the pillow, trying to force myself to sleep. Useless. I had to resort to an old tradition: roll onto my back, lie perfectly still, and think about everything and nothing, waiting for the sky to lighten. I was just waiting for the first rays of dawn. Suddenly, I flinched. The doorbell rang, piercingly. Someone was pressing the bottom way too hard, as if trying to wake up the neighbors too. I figured my parents had returned. I rushed to the door, reached for the lock, automatically asking, "Who is it?" No one answered. I got suspicious. The bell rang again with the same persistence. "Who is it?" I said. "Answer me." In response, silence. I listened closely. No rustling, total silence. A chill hit me. The bell rang again. I stood on my tiptoes and looked through the peephole. The porch was flooded with a bright light. I saw him. A boy, maybe 10 years old, standing on the threshold. He wore a simple sheepskin coat, no head, old felt boots, and mittens dangling on strings. His hair was dark, his face round but completely devoid of expression. His eyes were huge, colorless. It was snowing outside, but there wasn't a single snowflake on him. His clothes were dry. He lifted his head and looked straight up, as if he knew I was watching him. And then it hit me. How did such a small kid reach the doorbell? Why is he silent? And where did he come from? There are no kids that age in our neighborhood. The terror soaked into my bones. I kept watching, and suddenly, the boy curled his lips, and his face instantly darkened. He opened his mouth and spoke.
"Don't look at me."
The voice was raspy, creaky, like an old man.
"Don't look, or it will be worse."
I wanted to scream, but I stumbled back into the hallway. But the scratching had already started. A guttural muttering came from the other side.
He saw, he saw, he saw.
I stood there, paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. The scratching and rasping got louder. "Oh God!" I screamed, losing my mind. "Deliver me from evil." I started praying, my hand trembling towards the door. "Help me, God. Protect me from this." And almost immediately, the scratching stopped. Something rasped, slammed against the door, and went silent. I kept praying, making the sign of the cross in the air. I stood like that for 10 minutes. I listened. Silence. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. I went back to my room, turned on every light, and sat there until morning, until I just passed out from the tension. My parents returned by noon. They woke me up, complaining about the weather, and asked what happened to the front door. They said there were scratches on it. It's upholstered in vinyl. We replaced the layer recently. The scratches were small but noticeable, deep. I thought I was going to faint when I saw them myself, but I held it together. Since then, I haven't heard the doorbell ring, neither has Mom. And thank God, someone or something really accepted that it wouldn't be let in. Or maybe it got scared that it was seen. Or it's knocking on another door. And God forbid, someone
Open, Sid.
My neighbor Julia told me this story. A few years ago, she and her husband Sasha were renting an old apartment. One morning, after her husband had already left for work, Julia woke up to a strange sensation. It felt like someone was gently stroking her hair. She smiled sleepily, thinking Sasha had come back to say goodbye. But when she opened her eyes and turned around, the room was empty. Just imagined it, she thought, and went back to sleep. A couple of days later, it happened again. Julia was lying on her side, facing the wall, dozing off. Suddenly, she felt the mattress behind her deep under someone's weight. She heard heavy, raspy breathing right above her ear. Someone's icy fingers touched her neck and slowly crawled down to her shoulder. Julia froze with terror. She tried to find a rational explanation. "Sasha, is that you?" she asked with a trembling voice. The breathing behind her stopped for a second. The fingers gripped her shoulder with painful force. And then, a quiet stranger's voice whispered right into her ear.
No, don't turn around.
As if scouted, Julia jumped out of the covers and ran out of the apartment in her pajamas without even looking back. She waited for her husband outside, shaking hysterically. Later, they learned from the neighbors that a young guy used to live in that apartment. He went mad from loneliness and hanged himself right above the bed where they slept. Apparently, he is still looking for someone to keep him
Company.
The couple decided to take a break and go into town for dinner. They called a babysitter they knew who often watched their kids. When she arrived, the two children were already asleep in their beds upstairs. She just had to sit in this huge old house and keep an eye on things. Soon, she got bored. She decided to watch TV, but there was no cable in the living room. The parents were strict. The girl called the father and asked the permission to watch TV in their bedroom. "Of course," the father replied. "Thanks," she said. "And I have one more request. Do you mind if I cover up that angel statue outside the bedroom window, or at least close the curtains? It's really unnerving me." That silence hung on the line. For a second, it seemed like the connection was lost. And then, the father screamed into the phone, and there was genuine terror in his voice. "Grab the kids, run out of the house. We're calling the police." "What? Why?" The girl got scared. "We don't have an angel statue." The police found all three of them dead 10 minutes after the call. The house was empty, and the angel statue was never found.